It was an ordinary day, seemingly without significance. The blue sky shone as it did on any other morning, and the birds singing seemed to announce just another routine beginning. But that morning, something invisible stirred in the heavens, something that would forever change the life of one man. This man was not a prophet, nor a priest, nor a renowned ruler. He was simply someone who lived with righteousness, simplicity, and reverence in his heart. His name was Job. Job was known for his integrity. He was respected by all who knew him, not because of wealth or power, but because of his conduct. In his village, many said he was an example of how to walk with God, and they weren't wrong. But what no one knew was that behind the curtains of eternity, his faith was about to be tested in such a profound way that it would forever change humanity's understanding of trust, suffering, and redemption. While Job tended to his animals that morning, a conversation was taking place in another realm. In the invisible world, beyond human sight, the sons of God were presenting themselves before the Creator. And among them, silent and cunning, was an adversary. The same one who from the beginning sought to destroy what was pure. The Lord, in his infinite wisdom, asked directly, "Where have you come from?" And the accuser's answer was brief but revealing, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Then, like a father who knows the heart of his child, God mentioned Job. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, a man of integrity and uprightness who fears God and shuns evil." And with this, a conversation began, one that few would understand at first glance. The adversary accused, "It's easy to love God when everything is going well. Take everything away from him and you'll see who he really is." God, confident in Job's essence, allowed the test, but with a limit. Touch everything he has, but do not lay a finger on him. On earth, life went on. Job's family was large and close-knit. His sons and daughters celebrated together, laughed together. It was a family that lived with joy and love. And Job, even as a busy man, always took time to pray for his children, not out of obligation, but out of devotion. In silence, he offered prayers after each feast, asking forgiveness for sins they may not have even committed. That was Job, someone who cared more about others' souls than his own safety. But then, suddenly, everything changed. First, a messenger came running, breathless, eyes full of despair. The oxen were plowing, and the Sabaeans attacked. They killed the servants. I alone have escaped to tell you. Job barely had time to process the words when another messenger appeared. Fire fell from heaven, burned the sheep, destroyed everything. Only I escaped. A third interrupted. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and took the camels. The servants, all dead. Job felt the weight of these words as if each syllable fell like stones on his chest. And then, the cruelest blow. A final messenger, tears streaming down his face, said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting, and a strong wind struck the house. It collapsed on them. No one survived. I alone am here." Job heard it. But for a moment he couldn't feel. Everything seemed to dissolve within him. The world spun. The ground slipped beneath him. His body folded, and he tore his robes. He fell to the ground. But unlike what many would do, he didn't scream in rage. He worshipped. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Not a word against God, no complaint, only reverence. As heaven watched in silence, hell trembled. The one who accused had expected rebellion, but saw worship. The enemy hoped to hear curses, but heard praise. Yet the story wasn't over. Once more, the sons of God presented themselves. And once more, the adversary was among them. God asked again, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Now, before a grieving but faithful Job, the accuser made a new proposal. Strike his health, take his strength, hurt his body. Pain will reveal who he truly is. Then, with limits set, the second trial was released. Job, who had already lost everything, was now afflicted in his own flesh. Sores broke out all over his body, painful, burning. There was no cure, no relief. Job sat among ashes. He scraped his wounds with broken pottery. The man once honored was now avoided. Yet still he did not complain, until his own wife, consumed by despair, confronted him. "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. You speak as a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" He didn't understand what was happening, but he trusted. And here lies the beginning of the greatest secret faith can reveal. When pain invades the heart, when everything seems lost, it is there, in the valley of the shadow, that true faith is forged. The days passed, but for Job, they felt like decades. The wounds didn't heal. His body weakened, but it was his soul that screamed in silence. His neighbors kept their distance. The glances changed. The man who had once been honored by all was now seen as someone abandoned by God, as if his suffering were a sign of guilt. And it was exactly at this moment, at the peak of his pain, that his friends arrived. 3 men traveled long distances to see their old companion. They found him unrecognizable. Job, thin, frail, his skin marred by illness, sat among the ashes like a man in ruins. The friends tore their robes and wept, and for 7 days and 7 nights they said not a single word. They sat beside him in silence. For Job's suffering was so great, so overwhelming, that any word would seem empty in the face of such pain. Until Job broke the silence, not with an ordinary complaint, but with a deep, raw cry. He cursed the day of his birth. He lamented having come into the world. He begged for that date to vanish from the memory of time. It wasn't rebellion, it was pain. It wasn't denial of God, it was human despair. Job wasn't trying to blame, he was trying to understand. Then one of the friends named Eliphaz spoke up. He tried to comfort Job with ancient logic. Those who suffer, suffer because they have done wrong. With careful words, he suggested that Job, perhaps unknowingly, had committed some sin. That if he would just confess and seek forgiveness, everything would be restored. He pleaded, "Just let me speak to God, I want to understand." But the friends continued. Bildad was harsher. He even implied that Job's children had died because of their own sins, and that God, being just, would not punish without a reason. Job was heartbroken. Being accused when your heart is already in pieces is a second suffering. Zophar, the third friend, was the most aggressive. He accused Job with severity. "You talk too much. That's why you're suffering. God is actually being merciful with you." These words hurt more than the sores on Job's body. He felt surrounded, judged, condemned by those who should have been lifting him up. Even so, Job held his ground. He didn't pretend to understand what God was doing, but he also didn't renounce his faith. On the contrary, he said something that would echo for centuries, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." A declaration not born from logic, but from purest faith. Job believed even without understanding, and that's what set him apart. Now, allow me to pause here and ask you something personal. Have you ever been through something like this? Have you ever felt that your pain was too much, and that no one understood what you were going through? Have you ever tried to explain your struggles only to receive judgment in return? Then maybe you can relate to what Job went through, and maybe right now you're being called to remember something profound. God does not forget those who suffer in silence. He is closer than it seems, even when everything feels dark. If this story is stirring something in your heart, I want to ask you for something different. not just a quick like or a generic comment. But if you feel that somehow this journey of Job connects with yours, share something in the comments. It can be a word, a verse, a moment that marked your life. I will read each one. And if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, I invite you now. Join our community. Here, we don't just watch stories, we live transformations. Turn on the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. You might be the comfort someone's been praying for. Now let's return. Time passed. Job continued to endure the verbal attacks from his friends. They insisted that suffering only exists because of sin. But Job refused to accept that simplistic explanation. He didn't deny his pain, he just wanted answers. So he cried out, "I wish I could have a meeting with God. I wish I could present my case before him." He didn't want to win an argument. He wanted understanding. He wanted to be heard. Then, a new voice emerged. A young man, younger than the others, who had remained silent until then. His name was Elihu. He had listened to everything in silence, but now he felt compelled to speak, and his words came with force. Unlike the others, Elihu didn't accuse Job directly, nor did he defend him blindly. He brought a new perspective. Elihu said that God speaks in many ways, but we don't always understand. That suffering can be a way to teach us, to refine us. That God is greater than human logic. And maybe, just maybe, pain isn't punishment, but process. A process of growth, of intimacy, of transformation. And it's right there, after all the dialogues, after all the unanswered questions, that the unexpected happens. God reveals himself, not with detailed explanations, but with questions. He speaks to Job from a whirlwind and says, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Who set the limits for the sea? Do you know how the universe is God?" One by one, God's questions are not meant to humiliate Job, but to open his eyes. Job realizes something profound. He had been seeking answers for his suffering, but God wanted to give him something greater than answers. He wanted to give him revelation. Job fell silent, not because he received the explanation he wanted, but because he finally saw God, not with physical eyes, but with the eyes of the soul. He understood that the Creator was never absent, that even in the midst of pain, even in the silence, God was weaving something eternal. Job then confesses, "Before I had only heard of you, but now my eyes see." And with those words, something breaks inside him, not in despair, but in surrender. He repents not for a hidden sin, but for having limited God to his own understanding. He lays down his complaints and exchanges them for awe. He sets down his questions and lifts up words. And it is in this moment of surrender that the tide begins to turn. God then turns to Job's friends. But instead of confirming their words, he rebukes them. "You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job." In an ironic twist, those who accused Job now have to seek forgiveness through him. And Job, showing once again the depth of his heart, prays for them, intercedes for those who... And then the restoration begins. God restores Job's fortune, double of what he had before. But more than wealth, Job receives something far greater. He receives understanding, intimacy, and peace. His friends return. His family gathers again. New sons and daughters are born. But now, Job is not the same. His faith, once built on tradition, now stands on revelation. He knows who God is not because of what he gives, but because of who he is. And this is the true triumph of the story of Job. Not the restoration of possessions, but the transformation of the soul. And now I want to speak directly to you, heart to. There are moments in life when we feel like Job, stripped of what we love, misunderstood by those we trust, walking through pain that no one else can see. Maybe you are in that moment now. Maybe you've cried alone, questioning in silence, trying to understand why things happened the way they did. I want you to know, God sees you. He hears your silence. And even if it doesn't feel like it, He is working in the background, just like He did for Job. Maybe you won't get the answers you're looking for. Maybe the why will remain unanswered for a while. But like Job, what if the real blessing isn't in the answer, but in the presence? What if through the pain, God is drawing you closer, not to explain Himself, but to reveal Himself? That's what He does with those He loves deeply. He allows the fire not to destroy, but to refine. He allows the silence not to ignore, but to whisper. He allows the loss not to punish, but to awaken something greater in you. So if you're still here with me, if this message has stirred something in your soul, I invite you. Don't walk this journey alone. Join our community. Here we don't just read ancient stories, we live real encounters. Subscribe to this channel, activate the bell, and share this video with someone you know who is suffering in silence. You might be the light they didn't know they needed. Leave a comment, share your experience, your prayer, your question. This space is sacred. Every word you write is seen, read, and felt. We're not just content creators, we're companions in faith. And if today you're in the ashes like Job, remember the God who allowed the valley is the same one who walks beside you through it. And one day, just like with Job, He will lift you up. Maybe not with answers, but with peace. Now take a deep breath, rest your soul, and let these words remain with you. Though He slay me, yet will I hope in Him. That's the kind of faith that moves heaven.